As part of Black History Month, we're putting the spotlight on several Black Canadians leaving their mark on this country. Tonight, our focus is on a politician who made history in the House of Commons. In October, Greg Fergus became the 38th Speaker of the House. It also marked the first time a person of color took on the role. However, just 2 months later, opposition parties called for his resignation after he appeared in a video tribute at an Ontario Liberal Party convention while dressed as House Speaker. A report into the incident recommended he be punished but not fired. Speaker of the House of Commons, Greg Fergus, joins me now in studio. Speaker Fergus, thank you so much for coming in on Canada Tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here, Travis.
I read that you said your mom and dad always said to me, look, I can't give you money, we can't give you connections, but we can give you an education. Talk to me a bit about the values that your parents instilled in you and how that has pushed you through your career and your life.
Well, all the mistakes are mine, but all the good stuff,
We're going to get to that, by the way.
Well, all the good stuff, my parents were key in helping that out. Look, they came to this country to try to provide a better environment for their families, right? A better reality that they saw. Canada was a country of potential. And so, quite rightly, they said, look, they don't have money to offer us, but they were willing to work really hard. My dad worked 2 jobs to make sure that we got good education. My mom stayed at home and provided us with a wonderful and stable home. And, they just were good, hardworking people.
How do you think the country has evolved from the time when your folks came to today?
It's night and day.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think about how Canada at the turn of the century had not an official policy, but quite the unofficial and followed policy to not allow people, blacks to come up from the United States, don't have that American problem in Canada. Mm-hmm. Yes, there were Indigenous black people who were here, especially in Nova Scotia and especially in Montreal, but those policies gave way. Canada's a completely different place now. I think it was probably our 100th anniversary where we decided that we want to see ourselves differently. We want to see ourselves as a multicultural country. We opened ourselves up to the world.
When did you first get interested in politics? I know that you had the Hansard delivered to your home as a teenager.
Back
is that true?
It is absolutely true. I was taken with federal politics.
Okay.
And so when I was 14, I wrote away asking for Hansard to be sent to my house. So every day I got in the mail in a tube envelope, 2-cylinder rather, procedures, votes, and Hansard. And I would read it, and it's funny, when you're a teenager, you just have that kind of time. Right?
Yeah, I guess so. Most teenagers don't, by the way, read the Hansard.
No, but
your typical teen reading, but okay.
They do something, right? I was a little bit of a nerd, and so I really, read it, and you'd hear the voices in your head. I didn't hear the voices, but you imagine who some people were. So, I was taking a look at, there were some MPs who were just extraordinarily funny, and that just lifted right off the page.
Did you have an idealistic view of politics at that point? And has that shifted?
I probably still do. I have to admit, I think politics is, and being of service to people is the highest calling you can have. Look, we can govern ourselves. We can run ourselves, we can vote for ourselves. That is extraordinary. Not a lot of places have that ability to do that, and we haven't had that ability consistently over time. A story I always like to tell young people is that, if you take a look at the last 5,000 years of reliable history, when you take a look at the times where even if you'd consider if you were a man of a certain age, of a certain ethnicity, and free person in ancient Greece, and you call that a democracy, and you take a look at all the other times we've governed ourselves, they've appeared here and there in different geographical places and disappeared, gone away. Sometimes it doesn't come back in that place. We have this opportunity right now where we have universal suffrage. As long as I'm a citizen of this country and I'm over the age of 18, I could run for office. I can vote. I have a say. No matter what age you are, you have a say. That's remarkable. I think there's a real there's almost a sacred aspect of it, that just being who we are, just existing, we can vote. That wasn't always the case.
How do you not become, because that's a very idealistic view, how do you not become cynical when you see, some of the discourse that is going on right now?
Yeah, no, look, I think cynicism is a luxury few people can afford. I think the question is, are we willing to roll up our sleeves and get to work and do the business of the people in a way that's appropriate? You can have very passionate debates. You can have very pointed debates. That is what is expected. But within the framework of making sure that it's within that level of respect, and that there's a certain level of decorum.
And I want to talk a little bit about, how you are doing that as Speaker of the House to, make sure that there is decorum. But first, let's talk about when you first became the Speaker. What was that moment like?
It was overwhelming, to tell you the truth. It was very exciting. It wasn't lost on me on the historic aspect of it. And it wasn't lost on me on the challenge that's in front of me in terms of trying to work with members to bring out the best in members of Parliament so that they can have those debates, so that Canadians can feel that, this is a place where they would want their children to run for. This is a place where good and serious debate is happening.
Historic moment, no doubt, but I know that you said, I'm asking them to vote for me because I'm the best candidate. I can apply the rules fairly, firmly, and consistently. It's interesting because there are so many different places where we have the conversation about diversity, but there's also a conversation going on about tokenism as well. And this quote really stood out to me because you understand the historic nature of it, but you still want people to look at the qualifications and not just the color of your skin.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think if you have that opportunity to do that, I want everybody to take a look at the qualifications which we have. But the reality is that people do make judgments on the basis of the color of the skin or the gender that you have or the orientation or religion or a whole host of things. Our job, I think, is I think anybody who is one of these groups, all they want is a level playing field. All they want to be is judged on what they can contribute to the debate and not on superficial aspects. But we have to recognize the fact that anti-Black racism does exist. And that we need to make sure that we look at ways to try to eliminate that.
And so does it take uncomfortable conversation sometimes?
It takes uncomfortable conversations, but before you even have uncomfortable conversations, I think you need to have data. This is not the sexy issue, but this is a gift that keeps on giving. We need to have disaggregated data because when you start taking a look at the numbers and you start focusing in on those numbers, then you start realizing you have some really wonky results. Black Canadians are only second to Indigenous peoples in, being ahead in the issues that we don't want to be ahead in, and being behind on places where we do want to be ahead in. But there are some projects which have shown that from a very young age, from kids in primary school, from kindergarten, that Black kids are targeted more often for discipline. For matters which they might look the other way for other kids, they see it as a problem with Black kids. You see that in terms of our policies on arrest and remand and even sentencing. You see that in many different things. And so how do we get those wonky results? It's not because people are outwardly racist. No, there are some unconscious bias going on. And so you need the data to be able to look at that coldly and say, look, how did we get here? And how can we fix this?
Do you see progress being made on that front?
I do. I mean, look, compared to what my parents went through, compared to when I was a young kid, we're living in a much better time. And why is that? Because there were a lot of people who did that work years before.
Is there a fear of going backwards?
Well, if everybody does their job, if everybody takes on the responsibility of citizenship, I think that we stand a good chance of fighting against it. But if we don't do anything, if we leave it to others, if we say that if we adopt that cynical point of view, politics, it's not for us.
Right.
Well, then I'll tell you, the system doesn't take care of itself.
Yeah, at the beginning, you mentioned mistakes. We do have to talk about December. You came under fire for that video that was played at the Ontario Liberal Party convention, which you paid tribute to John Fraser.
It's such a great opportunity to speak about my longtime friend, John Fraser.
While in the speaker robes. You've admitted this is a mistake. Why'd you make that video?
Well, look, you're putting me in an uncomfortable position because as speaker, it's important for me to maintain impartiality. Mm-hmm. And I've made a number of declarations explaining what the situation is. I don't have the same privilege that a normal politician would have in being able to defend themselves at all costs. I can only let the record stand. So, can you tell me what that period was like for you personally, though? Oh, look, every politician at some point gets their time on the barbecue, as a friend of mine once said. I had mine. It wasn't so pleasant, but you just keep on going.
Do you think folks have moved past that?
I do. The House of Commons reconfirmed my role as Speaker. We've moved on. There's been really good discussions with members. I'm not the story. Yeah. As I should not be.
I mean, you were, before you became the Speaker, a lifelong Liberal. And we've had conversations on the couch on panels and things like that about how much impartiality a Speaker can have. And I know that you said that, it's basically like a switch. When you became the Speaker, you became impartial. How does that work? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think the best way to take a look at that and the best way to judge that is taking a look at the decisions that the chair has made. Mm-hmm. And I think any observer would say that the decisions that I've made as Speaker and the rulings that I've made in the House of Commons have one that are based in impartiality and the best traditions of the House.
You wanted to restore decorum. I know one of the things that you said was that scripted speeches create false polarization. How are you restoring decorum? How are you, doing this in kind of day to day?
Well, I think there are a number of ways of doing it. First of all, making sure that members are being fairly treated, having conversation with individual members, and encouraging members to talk to each other. Look, as Speaker, I can't make people engage in respectful debate. I can't make them follow decorum. They have to want to do it themselves. Yeah. And my sense is if you get members out of the lights and behind the curtains, they want that. They really, all members just want to make sure that they're doing right by their communities and by their country. Is it challenging at times? Of course it's challenging, but that's the role of Speaker. Yeah. So it's not easy, but just being a member of Parliament is challenging. It's an exciting opportunity, but it's one where you're constantly negotiating with 110 or 120,000 constituents that you have to try to making sure that you're reflecting, largely where they think that their representative should go. It's a tough job, but it's one that I think is necessary, one that allows us to enjoy the freedoms that we have, and it's one that I'm really privileged to have the honor of representing my community. How would you describe the level of discourse right now that we are seeing on the floor of the House of Commons? Do you think it has improved since you've become Speaker? I think it might be a little too... It's still a work in progress. Okay. It's still a work in progress. It might be a little too early to say. In some ways it's improved, in some ways it stayed the same. But it's one which I think the more we talk about it, but the importance of having civil discourse, I think the more then Canadians are going to demand that of their representatives, and the more you'll see it. Mm-hmm. It is, Black History Month. It is. Happy Black History Month. Happy Black History Month. What do you reflect on in February? February gives me a real opportunity to take a look. It allows me to do two things. It allows me to take a look at the past, take a look at the people, the generations of activists, of people who have really labored under much different and more difficult situations than one that I'm enjoying today. And because of them, I am enjoying the opportunities that I think we all have here. But don't make any mistake, there's still a lot of work to be done. And so that's where I think you go from looking in the past and you start looking at the future. And the way that we make the future brighter and to make one that's more inclusive, one that is more diverse, that's taking advantage of the richness that we have in this country, well, then that means we got to act today. And that means we need to be looking out at the next generation and looking out at what actions and what things that we're doing today.
If you were a young person today, looking at politics in this country, looking at the conversations that are going on, would you still be ordering Hansard? Do you think that you would still be as engaged? Or do you think that there's a disconnect there? Because I will tell you, some young people are apathetic. They are cynical.
Cynicism is a luxury few can afford, and I certainly can. If we are cynical, then the system is we're gonna innovate ourselves out of the sweet spot,
right?
In which we live, and that's a problem because when we change political systems, people like me usually end up at the back of the line. Yeah. We've just arrived, right? We've just got the rights to participate, to vote. We are now activating a community. There's a real black renaissance which is happening in Canada. It would be such a loss to start over.
So what would you say to young people that are watching this that say, and politics not for me, I don't need to pay attention to that?
Well, there's an old joke, if you don't pay attention to politics is surely paying attention to you. Yeah. So I'd say two things to them. I'd say, one, get involved. Don't be afraid. You know what? If you do nothing, nothing will change. But if you do something, if you contribute, you run the risk of making change. So get involved. Don't be afraid. We already got the no. Let's see how we can get the yes. And then the second message which I would give young Canadians, especially young black Canadians, is talk to each other, support each other. Anti-black racism is tough. It eats at your mental health. And although we're very resilient, and although all our parents said you have to work twice as hard to achieve the same thing, that's a tall order to fill. And sometimes you might just fall down. If you have more people who you are networking with and who you're talking to, who can share the glories and also share the pain, well, that's a much easier burden to carry than to carry it all by yourself.
There is the day-to-day grind when you are in Ottawa, when you are on Parliament Hill. Yeah. But do you ever take moments to reflect on where the journey started and where you are now?
Yeah, sometimes. I'm an inveterate runner, so I try to get out every day and get some kilometers in, and that's the time where if I were to think about it, that's where it would come about. I also get it sometimes when you're walking down the street and somebody just comes up and shakes your hand and says, "Hey, my daughter now sees herself as a member of Parliament or as the Prime Minister or as this or as that," because you're there. Seeing is believing, and so that's the kind of thing that keeps me going. That's when I really I appreciate the historic nature of it. That's what gets me up and gets me going every day.
Speaker Fergus, thank you so much.
It really is a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month.